Hey guys, Drifter here. This is a video response to Mrwutevah, or it's kind of like Call of Communism Part 2. Either way, it's going to be a very long commentary because a subscriber of mine, Mrwutevah, made a very long and detailed video about me and about the two videos I made called Call of Capitalism and Call of Communism. It was essentially a criticism of the two videos, and to a lesser degree of me, that said that my political opinions oppose themselves. And I want to make it very clear that I didn't take offense to this in any way, and I'm not making this video to say anything bad against him. It's just interesting to continue a discussion with these long back and forth videos, so I'm going to respond to his response and go over all the things that he pointed out were wrong with what I said, because there were quite a few. Communism and socialism are difficult things to explain in a short period of time, especially to an audience with mixed levels of education and mixed levels of prejudices, and I believe I skipped over too many things in that video to keep it down to a shorter period of time so that a lot of people would watch it. The first thing I would like to say is that there was some confusion of my overall opinions of socialism and communism, and I gave the impression that Canada and Sweden were dictatorships that had secret police and strict laws and that sort of thing. That's entirely not true. What it was is the video was meant to be a criticism of these systems and not necessarily anything else, so I didn't even bother explaining them. And the better parts about living in Canada and Sweden, which are their relative freedoms, which are at least on par with the United States, I didn't explain. And because I left that out, a lot of people ended up being confused, and some of the people in those countries ended up being insulted, so I'm sorry about that. I know that your countries aren't little Soviet Russias. I thought it would be best in the beginning of this video to very briefly explain communism, and I'm going to use the example that a subscriber sent in, another person, because I got a lot of feedback about this message, about this video, mostly from Europeans, but I got a fellow here in the United States who was a physicist and said that while this is not his area of expertise, he likes to read about these things, and being from a scientific background myself, the way he said it made a lot of sense. So the shortest version of communism that I can possibly come up with is going to be on Karl Marx's theory of means of production. And we're going to say means of production is not money, means of production is not owning a piece of land or a piece of equipment, but means of production is more owning the money, the land, the equipment, the rights, all of these things, or whatever of these things gives you the power to make the decisions of what the company or organization does with the profits and how it's structured and all that. So it's kind of like owning the power to do all of these things. And his idea is that ultimately in any society there's going to be a class struggle between the people that do the labor and do the work, which he called the proletariat, and the owners, the people that own the means of production, which he called the bourgeois. I feel so silly saying this on the internet. It's one of those words that I read a lot, but I've never heard said in real life. Bourgeois. Oh, well, whatever. The people that own the means of production. And he said that because these people own the means of production and they're very powerful, that the laborers don't have an equal say in what to do and what their wages are and what their work is like, and that there's this big power balance here, because it's a very tiny, I'll say the best way to say it is the 1% owns the means of production, and everybody else is just not in that club, and they just have to take it or leave it. In our capitalist society, or as we're taught in basic economics, we would say the laborers can form a union, they can collectively demand higher wages or individually demand higher wages, but Marx believed that the power inequality was too vast, and that even though there is some of that going on, that the power is ultimately in the hands of a very few that control the means of production. And the best example that I can give of this would be Walmart. If you're familiar with Walmart in the United States, imagine how vast of a company Walmart is. As a matter of fact, I believe it's one of the largest companies in the world, and it's one of the largest privately owned companies in the world. I don't think I can buy Walmart stock, if I'm not mistaken. Even if I can, it doesn't particularly matter, because they pay their workers so very, very, very little in order to keep the prices extremely low. And if you work at Walmart, they're very heavily anti-union. Your wages are low. You don't get to work full-time. You don't get benefits. They cut as many corners as possible. So there's a very big power inequality there between if you're a Walmart worker and if you're a Walmart owner. I'm not trying to single Walmart out. There are thousands of companies that do this. It's just probably the easiest, biggest, and simplest example. Because of this, Mr. Marx held several beliefs that eventually the proletariat or laborers would rise up and do away with the private ownership of means of production so that the means of production would be public and that the public in general could decide what to do with it. And you would still have things like money for a time being, but it would eventually transfer into a society where there was no private ownership of the means of production, not necessarily private property, because you would still be able to have things that are solely yours, but huge factories, huge plants, government services, all that sort of stuff would be completely in the realm of the public and everybody would have equal say in it. That's about as short as I can make explaining the entire system of communism. If you would like to know more, I would highly recommend you just go to Wikipedia. They have like a huge multi-page article that you can read through. Now I'm going to skip over to the video that Mrwutevah made, and I have not watched it in about 3 days, so I hope that I don't misquote him, but I did make a list of notes of specific things that I would like to talk about where I believe that you were mistaken mostly in your criticisms of me, but there's some things that you were completely right about, and then we're going to be talking about that too. At about 2:20 in the video, you talked about the system that you have in Sweden, working very well, which is a mostly socialistic system, if I'm not mistaken, with more capitalistic things being built into it every year. Like, it was very liberal, very socialist, but it's getting a little bit more right-winged, a little bit more capitalist, as you say, and you don't like that. But you say that your system has worked very well for a very long period of time, and I would wager that indeed it has. Your country, Sweden, and a lot of the Scandinavian countries, for that matter, have very high standards of living compared to the rest of the world, and they have very high levels of wealth compared to the rest of the world, very high levels of satisfaction, happiness, mostly all the good things we associate with those countries. I'm quite sure that you have several bad things, but they're not very well known to me, or I can't remember which country it is, had very lax penalties for murder and rape, and your prison wasn't like the prisons here where you go to get raped and beaten. It was like a dorm of sorts. I don't know if that's Sweden or not, but I would say that was one of the bad things. And you were talking about your system working even though immigrants are showing up, and now that immigrants are showing up to your country, you have a right-wing response party and that you don't like. And I'm assuming that you're embracing multiculturalism, but I know that not everybody in the Scandinavian countries do that. Some of them, as a matter of fact, can be quite racist, because my wife is a nurse here in Texas, and she was recently caring for a Norwegian man, as in he came over here from Norway like 2 years ago and brought his whole family and everything, and they speak English fairly well because the education system is pretty good, but he hates anybody that's not white. As a matter of fact, he told the nursing station that he does not wish to be treated by anybody that is a minority. Unfortunately, he had to accept minority treatment because every single nurse on staff that day was a minority in some way. He was not able to be served by a white person. And you see this in some of the Scandinavian countries. I'm not saying that's an average or that's a norm, but you are getting a little bit of this. And it's starting because a lot of the people in Europe, at least, I would say, are just starting to see the effect of the culture wars that we have in the United States. The Europeans in general are more open to change than others in some ways, and then not in others. Because you share different cultures locally with borders. If you live in a European country, you're a couple 100 miles away probably from a border of another country where somebody speaks a different language and they have a different currency. Here in the United States, we have an extremely diverse culture, but it's all in one country, just kind of depending on what you want. And because of this, it's very competitive. In the Scandinavian countries, people generally have ideals and values about collectivism and about neighborhood, community, family. You know, let's work together for the greater good, that sort of thing. This country was founded on competition because it was founded by immigrants from various European countries. You had English, you had French, you had Dutch, Scottish, Irish, German. You had like some Norwegians coming in. We had slaves coming in from Africa. We had Native Americans already here. We had Spanish coming in. Generally, they were more south, but they settled here in the United States too. And because of this, they all held radically different values from each other. They were just ethnically very different, looking very different, and most people are racist to some extent, and that just even subconsciously you'll like people of your own race better, or you'll dislike some people of some race for some reason. And they all founded their own colonies, and then we had to band together and work together, and then after that it went back to the colonies and states. So we actually had different currencies for a long period of time. Now we have immigrants coming in from various parts of Asia and the Middle East, and it's extremely competitive culturally. As a matter of fact, I think that white people, which is me, I'm white people, will be a minority in this country probably in the next 20 to 30 years. We will no longer hold the 50% majority. And in pretty much any city that you go to, you see this, and they don't hold the same value systems. They hold radically different value systems religiously, socially, work ethics. They even hold different value systems about time. They think about time differently. They think about family differently. Everything is different. You have a lot of competition. And our system, I believe that our capitalist system works much better in a society like that. If you have a social system in place in a society that is extremely competitive, it becomes more of a game of who can game the system more and who can get the most benefit with the least amount of work, which is quite bad. So watch out for that, because it might be in your near future. But speaking of which, people not wanting to work and that sort of thing, at 315 you talk about most people want to work and contribute, and that's actually quite true. From the studies that I've read and from what I understand, most people do like to work, believe it or not. They did a couple of experiments where they paid everybody pretty much a flat rate no matter what. If you did no work, or if you worked, or if you just got drunk all day, everybody got the same pay. And surprisingly, most people went to work, most people did what they were doing before, and they actually did it a little bit better. They were a little bit happier. There was no inequality, there was no uncertainness about wages, that sort of thing, and it worked pretty well. You had a few lazy people that just didn't do anything, but they were in the minority. And I would say in the United States, we might actually have more unemployed people because they don't feel that they're equally compensated for their work. The example that I would like to say is that I've faced this one actually. I could go and work at McDonald's for 15 hours a week, or maybe a little bit less than that, I don't know, make minimum wage, work a completely awful job that I hate and is depressing, and I would make like 10% more money than if I did nothing and sat at home and collect Social Security benefits. And my choice is, do I want to work all the time at McDonald's, or do I want to sit at home and watch Mrwutevah and make the same amount of money? I would just sit at home and watch Mrwutevah and make the same amount of money. I don't know what you people would do. But people in that situation, they quit working because of that. They feel that they are underappreciated. They have no voice. There is no justice for them. As a matter of fact, one of the most common causes for shootings, like the school shooting that everybody's talking about so much, is that the person feels that there is no justice, that there is a great injustice between something that's been done wrong in their lives and other people's lives are going well, or that they're being compensated. It's usually a social class thing. And that they have no voice. And this is a very bad thing in our country, because the minimum wage basically means if I could pay you less, I would, and I don't really like that. But then again, in our economy that's so incredibly complex and automated these days, some jobs are essentially worthless and probably could be and will be replaced by a computer in a short period of time. And there's no easier way to say that then that's quite true. At about 4 minutes and 10 seconds into the video, you mentioned that the economy is growing very well, and that the social elements and the government planning worked extremely well in Sweden. And I would say, yeah, it probably did work extremely well in Sweden. That's because compared to the rest of the world, your economy is extremely simple to manage. Population-wise, I think it's like 5 million, 8 million people. I don't have Wikipedia open. I'm not citing facts. I'm just kind of trying to pull from memory here. The economy has several facets, as always, but it doesn't compare in scale or complexity to the economy of the United States or China or Mexico or even other European countries like Germany. Germany has a huge economy, but these are massive monsters that are extremely complex, and you have lots of different people with lots of different wants and things that would generally be outside of the control of any sort of governing body. So in Sweden and some of the smaller countries, this can work well because the economy is based on, let's say, 10 things instead of 10,000 things. At 5:05, you say that your schools are way better than ours, and I'll tell you that you're completely right. The public education system in the United States of America is by and large deplorable. I believe that our collegiate education system is still excellent. There's, matter of fact, quite a few immigrants still coming over here just for the collegiate education system, and I'm very proud of my college education. However, our primary education system, our high school education, is failing by most of the world standards. most people emphasize math and reading, and those are very important things. Some people say that math is overemphasized. I would disagree, but we have people that graduate school. I mean, they pass and they graduate that are functionally illiterate. They can't read the most basic of contracts. They read on about a 5th or 6th grade level, which be like 11 or 12 years old. Barely able to write, not able to compose a paragraph very well. I mean, these are full-blown adults. Math is mind-boggling. They don't understand credit card debt or loans or anything like this. And that's very sad. What's even more sad than that is I understand that not everybody is going to be good at math. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't work that way. But they don't teach them anything else. There's not a lot of classes for, electrician, mechanic, woodshop, some sort of technical skill they could learn. A plumber, it's a dirty job, but I tell you, plumbers do make a lot of money in this country because it's specialized work. There's no backup for that. It's just we're going to teach you some basic math, English, crash course in arts, have fun. We don't need to teach you anything else, and it doesn't work very well. Not only are they not taught very well, but the standards by which the students are judged are particularly poor, and they put very high pressures on school systems and teachers to cheat and pass people anyway. And I did go to public school, and that happened a lot. A lot of students were just passed on along so that they would look better statistically on paper, and that's a very sad thing. But your education system, whatever you're doing over there, is very, very good. You're 15. At 15 years old, you made a very good, strong argument against the things that I say, and you did it in English, and I can assure you that your English is way better than my Swedish. Matter of fact, I only speak English because I don't need to speak other languages living where I live, except now that I live in Texas, I'm probably going to have to learn Spanish. At 725, you say that we don't need a lot of things to live very happily, and this was the main crux of your argument, that my Call of Capitalism video, I argued against consuming all of these things and buying more and more and more, and that by those same standards, I should enjoy a socialist society because I'm basically given what I need and not much else, and therefore that frees me up to pursue my desires more. And I would say that that's true where you are, but in a lot of other countries, I'm going to use South American countries as an example, this is not particularly true. The socialist system in countries like Venezuela or Ecuador, I don't think Colombia, I'm not entirely sure, they are more thinly veiled autocracies that disrupt private enterprises in order to gain more control, more power. The example would be like price fixing, to where a private company can't make milk or eggs or chickens or something like this. I actually got this example from a very helpful subscriber, and they would set it too high to where the company they can't make any profit, so they shut down, and then the government will be, oh, look at these private companies, these are so lazy, we're going to put a government one in place. And the government one doesn't work as well, but after a month or two of people not having milk, when they get milk again, they're very, very grateful. And the example is that the standard of living is different depending on where you live and depending culturally in a more socialist system. Where you live in Scandinavia, again Sweden, probably very high. If I were living in South America, because of a different cultural or social background about how people view view corruption, family, control, all these sort of things, it would be very, very different. And I'm assuming in the United States it would be a mad power scramble and things would be very, very bad. So that scares me quite a lot. That's why I don't want that system here in the United States, but I do understand that it can work very well in some situations. At about 8 minutes and 20 seconds, you mentioned that there are 400 people in this world that has the exact amount of wealth as the United States. There may have been some confusion here linguistically or otherwise. You seem to indicate that there were 400 people inside the United States that controlled the whole country, maybe. That's definitely not true. But across the entire world, I don't doubt that there are 400 people that have a similar level of wealth of this country. And you ask if that's a bad thing or if that's a corrupt thing. It probably is a little bit corrupt, but that is the nature of our world right now. Our economies, in any country that you live in, the economy is global competition. Everybody's competing with China, competing with the US, competing with EU, competing with Arabic countries, India now competing with emerging African countries, emerging Southeast Asian countries, Japan's in the mix. It's global competition. You have to be better than everybody else on the block, and it's very hard to do. One of the easiest ways to do it is to conglomerate, to centralize, to use those economies of scale to your advantage to do one thing very, very well. And that's why you have this wealth accumulation. People are pooling resources bigger and better. They're building, I would say, bigger, better titans to fight other titans of industry. It is in several ways bad things. Overall, I would say it's a good thing because, theoretically we get more, better, cheaper goods for everybody. The downside is that you do get some multi-billionaires that just kind of get so high up there in the money category they don't even live in any particular country, and the laws don't necessarily apply to them. And the laws don't apply to super rich people because, well, one, they're well connected and they have a lot of friends. I don't think it's fair. But if, let's say, I'll use the example, and I hate doing this, but let's say a guy who works at Burger King goes and hits somebody in his car in a hit and run. Okay, well, it's a relatively lower employed or underemployed individual. They can just pick him up and replace him. He'll go to jail. He'll get his trial. He won't be able to afford a lawyer, so he'll probably go to jail. And at Burger King, he'll be replaced. Just, it's not a big deal. You get more employees. Let's say if somebody that's very wealthy, like like Warren Buffett, or who's somebody that owns a company. Richard Branson, the guy that owns Virgin, is very active with his company. Let's say he ran somebody over. And the unfair part is that he'll get an unfair representation in court, and that he'll have better lawyers and be able to delay and that sort of thing. But on the flip side, if you take a major power player out of an economy, somebody that runs multiple multi-billion-dollar industries, that hurts everybody across the board. There is disruption in the entire organization. There are hundreds of thousands of people that lose jobs, lose money, become unemployed. Now, that doesn't tantamount to murder. That doesn't make up for the lost life. But there's a different level of impact in replacing people. And that's a terrible, I probably should not have used that example. But the unfair part comes from the different levels of representation in court, which is extremely unfair and makes me very, very sick, especially when you get to people like the Westboro Baptist Church or the group of Scientologists or something like that, or large corporations that pool together like an armada of lawyers to just bog everything down to where it's not even worth anybody's time to continue the court process. And I really hate that. I'm going to continue again. You talk about 9/10, that not everyone has the same opportunity, and that is unfortunately correct. In pretty much any capitalist system, there are social elements in play that we do get free high school, which is not particularly good. But that's true. The people are born poor. People are born with a lesser intelligence quotient, if you believe in that or not. People are born with disabilities. People are born with parents who are alcoholics, like me. My mom was a pretty bad alcoholic. People are born to drug addicts parents. People are born addicted to crack cocaine, and they remain low-functioning adults for their entire life. And it's a very sad thing. I would say that this is true all over the world, even where you live. Somebody that's born into an extremely wealthy and well-connected political family is going to have more abilities in his life than somebody born in the poorest of the ghettos, though in socialism it's not as bad. There's more of a flatter playing field instead of the peaks and valleys that we have in the United States here. And it's very frustrating to, you go through high school and elementary school, and everybody tells you, oh, you have equal rights, everybody's the same in the eyes of the law under God and all this sort of thing. But the opportunities are just not the same, kind of depending on who you are. And the example that I would use on this is I had a friend of mine in high school who was from a wealthier family, and I was very, very much so not. And it was baffling to him that I didn't have heat in my house or air conditioning, or that we would get sick and just kind of tough it out and deal with it. He was like, why don't you just go to the doctor? And I'm like, the doctor costs $1,000 and I can't pay for that. He's like, what do you mean you can't pay for $1,000? Everybody's got that in their bank. And like, I don't. Or stuff like, we had roaches in our house, big nasty roaches, spiders eating the roaches. We had like our own little grotesque ecosystem. He's like, man, why don't you just call the exterminator? I'm like, the exterminator costs $200. I'm not calling the exterminator. He's like, dude, just call him and pay for it. I'm like, if I call the exterminator, I'm just not going to be able to eat this month. I think I'll take my roaches and keep my food that the roaches are also going to eat. I just can't afford it. And that's an unfortunate thing in our country. I really don't like that. At about 12 minutes in, you're touching on conglomeration again. And again, I think that's a good thing in general, but the bad thing is that it creates monsters over time. It creates anti-competitive behemoths like Disney, Time Warner. I work in the media stuff a lot, so that's mostly what I'm thinking about. Huge auto manufacturers, nearly impossible barriers to entry. and we get trust, we get monopolies that are way beyond control. And I feel that especially in my country we need stronger antitrust laws, stronger anti-monopoly laws, because it feels like I almost feel like we're on our path to that movie Idiocracy some days, where the corporations own and control everything. And especially now that I move in a big city, I just drive down the road and the signs might as well be like in the movie They Lived, where it's like, consume, consume, eat, consume. It drives me crazy. Maybe that's just a personal thing. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. At about 14 minutes and 25 seconds in, you start talking about things that Americans really, really hate due to the competitive nature of our country. You're talking about how you have the tax rate for poor people, and then you have a different tax rate for richer people, and that's what we would call a progressive tax rate, where the more money you make, the more you are taxed. In economic theory, there are two problems with that. We'll say maybe not in real life. I'm not personally saying this is just what I was taught in class, is that as you tax somebody more, their willingness to work goes down, therefore their overall productivity and contribution to the economy goes down the more they're taxed. And in theory, anyway, a very wealthy person that works very hard managing businesses and making entrepreneurial decisions and whatever is contributing more than just a normal worker. So if you tax that person more and he wants to do less, you're therefore hurting the economy more. I'm not necessarily sure if that's true or not. It's true to some extent, obviously in extremes. In general, probably not so much. But our country is extremely, extremely competitive, and Americans don't necessarily like, or not all of us like, contributing to public funds for things because they view the public in general as moochers and lazy and people that don't want to work. And we talked about that earlier on, but that's just something that you can agree or disagree with, but it strikes a hard nerve in at least half of our country, if not more of the country. And the other interesting thing about tax rates is this is true in economics, and I believe this to be true personally, is that there's only a certain percent you can tax a person or an organization before they start cheating on their taxes. And there's actually an economic study of this. I forgot what it was, but the study says that you tax there's an optimal tax range that you can tax somebody just so much, and then after that, the opportunity cost or the risk for cheating on your taxes or not paying the taxes or skirting around them in some way are less than actually paying the taxes. So if you tax some people too much, they're going to stop paying at some point and start cheating. Although the point, we're actually fairly close to that here in the U.S. We have relatively high taxes. You have to get pretty high before that happens, but it does happen. I don't know why. I just wanted to really talk about that. And at the end of this commentary, close to 30 minutes later, I would like to say that I hope that everybody that was listening enjoyed something. I hope that you watched the original videos, perhaps. And if you're asking what system do I believe in some of the other videos I said that I was a capitalist, and I don't want you to think of me as like the monopoly guy with my little monocle like, capitalism, let's go tax the poor some more, or something silly like that. It's more of, it's where I grew up. It's what I'm familiar with. Mostly I understand other systems better than most, maybe, hopefully, I don't know. But I don't think any system invented by human beings is going to be perfect, because human beings are imperfect creatures. So even good systems, I'm still trying to choose the best or the lesser of two evils or something. And for my situation, at least in the United States, the lesser of those evils is going to be a capitalist system for the most part, with social elements, instead of in other countries a socialist system with some capital elements work better. Either way, you wouldn't find me protesting or rioting. I'm not like terrified of these ideas or ideals. I just don't think that they're the greatest for the country right now. And a lot of people ask me what I am politically, and I'm just not going to talk about that because it makes everybody on YouTube super, super angry. And I guess that's about it for this commentary. I hope that you learned something useful, and I hope that my response is accepted graciously. Drifter out.